There are places on Earth so remote, so battered by the elements, that they seem to exist outside of time. Attu Island, a lonely volcanic rock at the far western end of Alaska's Aleutian chain, is one such place. It is a land of perpetual mist, relentless winds, and a profound, echoing silence. In the summer of 2023, a lone fisherman named Joel Barnes was exploring its desolate, rocky shores when he stumbled upon something that didn't belong. It was an enormous, corroded iron chain, its lengths as thick as a man's arm, emerging from the black volcanic gravel and disappearing into the cold, churning waters of the Bering Sea. It was a silent, iron question mark in one of the most isolated places on the planet. Startled by its sheer size, he reported his find to the authorities. When a diving crew arrived days later and followed that chain into the depths, they discovered it was attached to a ghost of history, a sunken warship from a forgotten battle. And what they found inside its decaying hull was so dangerous, it would trigger an immediate military response. To understand the secret that lay at the end of that chain, you must first understand the island where it was found. Attu is the westernmost point of the United States, a wind-swept speck of land so far out in the Pacific that it is technically in the Eastern Hemisphere. It is part of the Aleutian Islands, a volcanic archipelago known as the birthplace of the winds, a place of notoriously brutal weather. For thousands of years, this harsh but beautiful island was the home of the Onondagas, or Aleut, people. They were a hardy and resilient maritime culture, living in harmony with the sea, hunting seals and sea lions, and building their homes partially underground to protect themselves from the relentless gale. They lived a life of profound isolation, their culture shaped by the unique demands of their environment. Their world, which had existed for millennia, would be shattered by the arrival of the Second World War. In the 20th century, the story of World War II is often told in the grand theaters of Europe and the Pacific. But there was another, lesser-known front, a brutal and savage conflict fought in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. This was the Aleutian Islands Campaign, America's forgotten battle, in June of 1942. Just 6 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Empire of Japan launched a surprise attack and successfully invaded and occupied 2 American islands, Kiska and, most importantly for our story, Attu. It was the first time since the War of 1812 that American soil had been occupied by a foreign enemy. The Japanese military forcibly removed the 42 Onondagas residents of Attu from their ancestral home and sent them to a prison camp in Japan, where nearly half of them would perish from starvation and disease. For the United States, the Japanese occupation of the Aleutians was a profound strategic and psychological blow. The fear was that the Japanese would use the islands as a staging ground for bombing raids on the American mainland. The decision was made to retake the islands at all costs. In May of 1943, a force of over 12 American soldiers was assembled to invade and recapture Attu. The American military planners, however, made a catastrophic miscalculation. They expected a quick 3-day battle. They equipped their soldiers for a cool Pacific Island climate, giving them standard leather boots and summer uniforms. They were completely unprepared for the reality of Attu. The island was a frozen, fog-shrouded hellscape. The soldiers landed in a blizzard, and they fought not only the well-entrenched Japanese defenders, but the island itself. They suffered from severe frostbite, trench foot, and exposure. Their leather boots fell apart in the freezing mud, and their weapons jammed in the constant wet cold. The fog was so thick that visibility was often reduced to just a few feet, turning battles into chaotic, close-quarters struggles. The battle for Attu was one of the deadliest in the entire Pacific theater, when measured by the percentage of casualties. The American forces fought for 19 grueling days, slowly pushing the Japanese defenders back into the mountains. Finally, on May 29, 1943, the remaining Japanese soldiers, knowing they were defeated and choosing death over surrender, mounted a final horrifying banzai charge. It was a suicidal, all-out attack that briefly broke through the American lines before being repelled. At the end of the battle, of the nearly 900 Japanese soldiers who had defended the island, Only 28 were taken alive. The United States had recaptured its territory, but at a terrible cost. The island of Attu, once a home, was now a battlefield, a war grave littered with the wreckage of planes, the remnants of fortifications, and the ghosts of the thousands who had died there. It is this violent, forgotten history that lay waiting at the bottom of the sea, at the end of that mysterious chain. Back in the present day, Joel Barnes, the fisherman, stood on the shore, watching as the U.S. Coast Guard cutter anchored in the bay. He had explained his discovery, sending them the photos he had taken of the massive, corroded chain. The Coast Guard crew, recognizing that such a chain could only belong to a very large vessel and was a potential navigational hazard, had brought a team of professional divers to investigate. 2 divers, clad in thick, dry suits to protect them from the frigid Alaskan water, descended into the murky depths. They followed the massive chain, link by link, as it snaked its way down from the shoreline and into the deeper water of the bay. The chain was taut, held fast against the powerful currents, a clear sign that it was anchored to something of immense weight. As they descended to nearly 80 feet, the visibility worsened. And then, through the green particulate-filled gloom, a colossal dark shape began to emerge from the darkness. It was the ghostly silhouette of a ship's hull, listing heavily on its side on the seabed. It was a warship. The chain Joel had found was its anchor chain. The divers had found one of the lost ships from the Battle of Attu, a silent witness to the brutal conflict that had raged here 80 years ago. They were about to discover what secrets this ghost ship had been guarding in its watery tomb. The 2 Coast Guard divers hovered in the frigid green twilight of the Alaskan Sea, their slow, rhythmic breathing the only sound in a world of profound silence. Before them, the sunken warship lay like a fallen giant, its hull draped in a thick shroud of marine growth, its sharp metallic lines softened by 80 years of slow decay. It was a haunting and beautiful sight, a man-made leviathan reclaimed by the sea. Their mission was now to identify the vessel and assess its condition. They began a slow, careful circumnavigation of the wreck. The ship was a transport vessel, not a frontline destroyer, and it lay on its side at a steep angle. As they reached the stern, one of the divers used his knife to carefully scrape away the thick layer of encrustation from the hull. And there, beneath the grime, were the faint, raised outlines of characters. They were not English letters, they were Japanese kanji. Historians would later identify the vessel as a Japanese maru, a transport ship, likely part of a supply convoy that was sunk by American aircraft during the brutal Battle of Attu. It was a war grave, a place where dozens of Japanese sailors had met their end, but the most significant discovery was yet to come. The divers noticed a large, jagged tear in the ship's hull, the likely result of the American torpedo or bomb that had sent it to the bottom. This gaping hole provided a dark, forbidding entrance into the ship's interior, into its cargo holds. With their powerful underwater lights cutting through the darkness, they cautiously entered the wreck. The interior was a chaotic mess of collapsed decking and twisted metal, and everywhere there was a thick, suffocating layer of fine silt that kicked up into blinding clouds with every small movement. They moved deeper, into what appeared to be the main cargo hold, and as their lights panned across the space, they saw the cargo, and their blood ran cold. They were not looking at crates of food or supplies. They were looking at an arsenal. Their light beams fell upon row after row of large-caliber artillery shells, stacked in what were once orderly racks, now partially spilled across the floor. They saw clusters of horn naval mines, each one a metal sphere of death, their sensitive detonator horns still intact. They saw wooden crates, their sides rotted away, revealing neat stacks of grenades and mortar rounds. The divers froze. They immediately understood that they were not in a historical site. They were in the middle of a massive, unstable underwater ammunition dump. The ghost ship was not just a relic, it was a booby trap, a silent, ticking time bomb that had been waiting on the seabed for 80 years. They carefully backed out of the wreck, their movements slow and deliberate, and began their ascent, carrying with them the news of their terrifying discovery. The divers' report triggered an immediate and serious response. This was no longer a simple case of a historical shipwreck. It was now classified as a major, public safety and environmental hazard involving unexploded ordnance, or UXO. This is the official term for military munitions that have been primed and fired but have failed to detonate and would still pose a risk of exploding. And old, submerged ordnance is perhaps the most dangerous and unpredictable of all. This is where the story shifts from historical discovery to modern-day danger. When munitions are left in salt water for decades, a sinister chemical process begins. The salt water slowly corrodes the metal casings of the shells, the mines, and the grenades. As the metal weakens, it can make the highly volatile explosive compounds inside incredibly unstable. Furthermore, the sensitive detonator mechanisms, which are designed to trigger the explosion, can themselves corrode, becoming hypersensitive to the slightest change in pressure, temperature, or even simple movement. What this means is that a sea mine from World War II, which might have been safe to handle in 1943, could, after 80 years in the sea, detonate if it is merely touched or even nudged by a strong current. The divers had been swimming through a minefield where any single wrong move could have resulted in a catastrophic explosion. Given the extreme danger, the mission was immediately handed over to the only people equipped to deal with such a threat, a Specialized Explosive Ordnance Disposal, or EOD, team from the U.S. Navy. A few days later, a much larger support vessel arrived at Attu, and a team of EOD divers, the Bomb Squad of the Sea, prepared to confront the sunken arsenal. Their work is some of the most dangerous in the world, a slow, methodical, and incredibly high-stakes process. They descended to the wreck with a new set of tools, not historical cameras, but remote-operated vehicles, specialized cutting tools, and countercharges. Their first task was to assess the stability of the munitions. They discovered that many of the artillery shells had corroded to the point where their explosive contents were leaking out, creating a toxic and highly unstable environment within the cargo hold. The naval mines were even more of a threat, some having broken free and rolling gently with the currents inside the ship. After a week of tense and dangerous work, the EOD team came to a sobering conclusion. The sheer volume of the ordnance and its highly unstable condition made a full recovery or a complete on-site neutralization impossible without risking a massive, uncontrollable chain reaction explosion that could have devastating consequences for the local marine environment. The decision was made to neutralize the most immediate threats, the loose sea mines, and to leave the rest of the arsenal entombed within the ship. The wreck of the Japanese transport ship was officially designated as a protected war grave and a hazardous restricted area, forever off limits to any future civilian divers. The story of the chain on the beach had reached its conclusion. The fisherman's chance discovery had brought a violent and forgotten chapter of the forgotten battle of World War II roaring back into the present. It led to the identification of a lost warship and the final resting place of its crew, and it revealed a dangerous, hidden legacy of that brutal conflict, an underwater arsenal that remains a silent threat to this day. The wreck, now mapped and monitored, will continue its long, slow decay in the cold, dark waters off Attu Island, a permanent and powerful reminder that the echoes of war do not simply fade away with time. They lie waiting in the silent places of the world, just beneath the surface, ready to be discovered.